Following resignations by former ministers to pursue their political ambitions, it was only a matter of time before President Muhammadu Buhari replaced them with new names. The Senate yesterday received 7 new nominees from President Buhari for consideration and confirmation as ministers of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. President Buhari in the letter listed the ministerial designates to include Henry Ikechukwu, Abia State, Umana Okonumana from Akwa Ibom State, Ekuma Joseph from Ebonyi State, Goodluck Obia from Imo State, Umar Ibrahim from Kano State, Ademola Adewole from Ondo State, and Odum Odi from Rivers State. Contrary to initial speculation, Rotimi Amechi, Ogbonayano, Godswill Akpabio, and Emeka Nwajuba who all resigned to pursue presidential bids will not return. Joining us on the show this morning as we take a look at the ministerial designates from the president is Sam Amadi, a Rice News analyst. Sam, good morning and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, Ruben.
Morning.
Good morning.
Yes, well, let's go straight into it. What do you think of the list of 7 ministerial nominees? Are you impressed? Do you think that this is, a great list? And what do you expect from the Senate screening process? A rubber stamp process or something different?
Okay, let's start with the list. I think not anything noteworthy, basically. I mean, arguably, the replacement is less in terms of pedigree when compared with those who have been replaced. So if you take, for example, Rivers State, where two-term governor, two-term Speaker of the House of Assembly became the minister, Rotimi Amechi, with significant political and managerial pedigree. He's been replaced by APC, in fact, the loyalist of Amechi, whose biggest office or most significant office, he is the local government chairman not of the most important Obia local government, but of one local government that's not well known. Not that it doesn't count, but essentially he is not. He doesn't have that pedigree like Amechi. If you look at Abia, the replacement does not come anywhere near Obono's pedigree and experience, and of course, intellectual and professional competence. Whether he did well as a minister is a different matter. And then if you go to Akwa Ibom, maybe you have Onomana, who as a business leader, MBA from economics from University of Calabar, MBA from Nigeria University, then MBA also, I think, or a certificate from Columbia Business School. And of course, a former secretary to the government of the state. So that's very strong profile. So one would expect that whereas Obia is not a technocrat necessarily, but has huge executive experience and did very well as a governor, maybe Omana will be somewhere a match or even an upgrade in terms of real technocratic capability. That makes sense. And of course, he has experience in oil and gas business. If you go to the Kano rep, Omar Ibrahim El Yakub, his last posting is special senior assistant to the President on House of Reps matter. Essentially, so basically, if you look at the list, and the Imo State up here, a Speaker of the House of Assembly, great political experience, a special advisor to the governor, a political loyalist of Governor Hope Uzodinma. So it comes with some significant political traction, and maybe arguably not far off from Emeka Nwajuba. So a mixed grill, but essentially this is not a heavy-hitting list. This is not anything technocratic. And what we expect from the National Assembly, I think it's just easy passage. I mean, at this point, they are winding down. At this point, people are doing politics. Many of them didn't get nomination. Some got nomination. This is not the time for any serious scrutiny of ministerial appointees. We didn't have it when this government had a lot of promise. And so now that the government is winding down on a very low note, some will argue very poor performance. Some will say, well, so performance. But again, there's no incentive for the National Assembly to now up the game and start doing scrutiny. Again, this is a replacement. I think, if not that this is a constitutional requirement, and surprisingly, the president was so fast to fill it. Some of us expected that maybe it would drag out and he wouldn't bother. Now he's doing it. It's basically to conform to the Constitution and give those states. And of course, some of the appointees themselves are eager to have their loyalists in that cabinet to further strengthen their home run, like Governor Hope Uzodinma, who obviously will run for second term as governor, and who is severely challenged in Imo State. And so he got his close associate into ministerial position, and that would be good for them. So I don't expect any delay. It's going to be easy passage and clearance for these nominees.
Thank you for that analysis. I'm just wondering where the women are and where the youths. We don't have that kind of representation, unfortunately, in this list. I think that's a missed opportunity here. But yes, you've talked about how people got their close associates, as you put it. The more uncharitable phrase would be their cronies in this list, which the National Assembly, as you've expected, will just basically rubber stamp and off they go. So what can we expect in terms of governance? Will they be trying to reinvent the wheel at this late stage or just carry on the work of their predecessors?
I think what one would have expected if the president was making a voluntary unforced appointment is that this late hour appointment will be appointments to rejig and maybe end with, with a success story. So you expect technocrats, great performers come in last minute to help to see if they can take the government, the administration, to the finishing line with our aplomb. But here, basically, these guys are not going to do, in my view, there'll be no much, uptick in performance. If you look at, for example, Niger Ministry, where the former minister spent a lot of time doing surveys, audits, and all kinds of politics, we're going to see nothing different. There's nothing different that maybe Omana will bring that will change, especially in election time when the actors will be more focused on mobilizing these militants and all the actors in the creek to win election. If you look at Transport Ministry, where Amechi performed, maybe more than average or about average in terms of, the rails and all that, we're not going to see much improvement from if his Laki gets into that position. He has no resume, no experience, no ideas that are different. So what I think is that, look, this government is going to probably end on this, plateau, just plateau out on this level. It doesn't look like if the president wanted to do something magical, then the people appointed to replace those who have gone wouldn't have been their, if you like, cronies or their allies. It could have been persons who come with different skill sets, persons who are not even politicians and probably who want to make their mark to position themselves for the next government, whether it's PDP or APC or Labour Party or another party. So primarily, we can conclude that, look, this is going to run out the time, and the focus now will be maybe getting a successor, getting APC to win election. And by the Nigerian tradition, all energies are going to focus on the election. So it's unfortunate that this is actually with the pandemic, with the economic meltdown, with the collapse, if you like, of governance in the country, where almost the better part of this real estate in Nigeria is taken over by lawlessness and criminality. This is actually the time you needed to increase the effectiveness of state institutions, and the ministerial appointees would have reflected that commitment. But the combination of politics and low energy leadership makes it difficult for us to have that kind of transformation. So we're going to live with this low energy governance, and these guys will have their time and put on their resume and maybe get in a better position to negotiate if the party wins the next election.
So, this brings me to the thinking that how do we now, bring in a level of accountability needed in government? So take, for instance, the Transport Ministry. A lot of projects were started. The last minister, Rotimi Amechi, still had a lot of accountability to give. Is that nobody's now going to hold them accountable on those projects any longer that they ought to have delivered? There are lots of projects. Is it that the Calabar rail line, the one that even goes to Maradi that was very controversial? So who gives account on all those projects? Who closes the book on all those projects?
Absolutely. But first, let's also remember that by the constitutional design, the president is the chief executive of the national economy. And so Section 5 says that executive power is in the president, who exercises it either by himself or the minister, or the vice president or the minister or any other public official. And so apart from the constitutional requirement of having all states in the cabinet, the president can actually have a ministry without a minister. And so everything that Rotimi Amaechi has done ought to be accounted. There are also permanent secretaries and staff who are in that office, so essentially it's not let off the hook. Now, based on the Public Procurement Act, based on the public service guidelines, he can be personally liable as chief executive of the ministry for any action he did or didn't do. Whereas the bulk of the political accountability is on Mr. President, who takes the benefit of the job done and who answers for the failure of the job not done well. The personal criminal or administrative accountability still resides with the chief executive who, exercising that power of the president, did things right or wrong. So on the level of criminality or abuse of power of procedure, the accountability is not foreclosed. But primarily, what comes back is, look, we need to have continuity. So if a minister leaves, this new minister is presumed the president has confidence in him, and therefore he picks up from there and complete those projects. And I agree with you that most of the projects under the Ministry of Power, or Ministry of Transport, are also flowing from the personality of Rotimi Amaechi, who can be gung-ho, but not really procedural and doesn't often follow due process. Is that they may be good, but essentially, did they go through the process? Did they benefit from all the approvals? And did they show cost-benefit analysis, which is what the Federal Fiscal Responsibility Act says you must have an idea more. Borrowings must show robust cost-benefit analysis in terms of economic impact. So do we have those things before proceeded? Look at what happened with the rail, in the rail crisis when the bandits, terrorists attacked the Abuja-Kaduna rail. The question was that we could have forestalled this if we did a $3 billion investment on some, maybe safety or technology to help us, secure the rail. And it came out that the company that we are used for this or proposed to use for is a company that is just a portfolio company, just registered for that purpose. So these are the kind of things you might see in that ministry. With the sense, with the way work is done, you just, the recklessness, the arrogance, and the overconfidence that we see. So you're right that Rotimi Amaechi has left the ministry does not really mean that we shouldn't account for those. And those borrowings are constituting serious challenge to the economic prospects in the future. So they must be thoroughly executed, well contracted, and value for money all the way in the value chain of the transaction. Okay,
the only caveat to that is that, our government is continuous. It's not just about the person holding the office. And in any case, we expect these relevant ministries, departments, and agencies of government to have institutional memory. That's why you have the administrative wing with all those, PAMSECs, directors, that report to the political office holder. We hope that documents will not disappear anyway, and that incoming ministers will be properly briefed so that they can kick off from whoever left off. However, I wanted to ask you, just since we're talking about the cabinet, the federal cabinet, what's your general assessment of the performance of these ministers since, President Muhammadu Buhari took over? Because some people have complained that some ministers have been there for 7 years. Only Nanono, Sabo Nanono was fired from the Ministry of Agri. Under Nanono's watch in the Ministry of Agri. That ministry could not even compile a register of farmers. It was an issue. But the president, I think asked him to leave in September. But generally, are there some stars that you have seen? Are there some persons you can say, well, have really been out and out, performance?
Yes, I think first, two things are important to make here. One is the choice of the ministers themselves, and also the dynamism of the executive branch itself. So the president's approach, appointment, and also how he treats this with his ministers will also help to shape performance. Performance happens as a team in an environment, enabling environment. So having said that, again, the president is not disposed to removing his ministers for lack of performance. Oftentimes it will be something very gross or politically very offensive. And so stepping back, I would say that arguably the Minister of Works has shown some capacity and engagement with the work. We may argue whether many of the roles have been done better than previous regime or not, but essentially we've seen significant activity on that Ministry of Works and Housing.
You are referring to Minister Fashola? You are referring
exactly.
to former governor of Lagos State?
In my view, absolutely. I think they have done, we can say, fair. Whether it's slightly above average or far above average is arguable. In power, he didn't do well, but in works and housing, I think he has done well. I think we can argue, actually, that in spite of the crisis with the fuel, with the petroleum, in terms of pushing the Petroleum Industry Act, but unfortunately, going back undermining it would cut down on the score I would give to that ministry under SAVER. But we saw some activity. I think that Ministry of Finance has not been very smart in policy making, but has actually been focused. There's so significant executive attention. Ministry of Science and Technology probably did nothing. You know, I don't see the impact. Power is a clear failure. If you look at agriculture, we've already run that. Education was a total mess. You know, whether the Minister of State or the minister himself, we didn't see coherence in policy. We didn't even see a sense of discipline in engaging with the crisis, whether it's teachers who are on strike or whether students or issues of failure of standards. So education, I would vote down as one of those ministries because of the critical importance for human development and even for economic growth. They didn't show capacity in that regard. FCT is a ministry. I think it's a total failure. I mean, if you look at FCT compared with what it used to be in the past, you can't see, apart from maybe receiving the plane at the airport and some, you know, if you argue, you know, controversial policies around morality, social morality, you know, closing down on pubs and all that, there's no footprint of a ministerial attention in the FCT. And so for me, really, it's difficult to scratch my head and say this is a real excellent performer. I would single out works and housing because essentially I can agree that there have been some, you know, activities going on and some good success in the area of road infrastructure across the country, even though our roads are still totally on the whole bad. I would take petroleum because there was a lot of energy to push that sector through, but now undermined by the reversals of policy and fear of taking out the subsidy. Then finance, basically because the woman has appeared disciplined through the work she's doing, but essentially no very smart and innovative policy framework. So you see, I'm struggling to be nice to these guys. Essentially, I don't think that's a very good, great performer in this cabinet.
Oh, well, moving swiftly on from that, is that controversial, ridiculous, whatever coinage you want to use, bow and go, which we are going to see with at least one nominee, the gentleman from Kano, El Yakubu, because he has legislative experience. You'll recall that it was a convention that was a privilege extended to only those who have served in the Nigerian Senate, the bow and go syndrome, because the assumption is if you've been a senator in Nigeria, you are versed on a number of national issues. But now it's been extended to anybody with legislative experience. I think the last time was extended to female nominees as well. It's just been extended to everybody. So what kind of screening are we likely to see? And is it safe to assume that these ministerial nominees will be stepping neatly into the spaces left by the predecessors from their own state, or might the president place them elsewhere?
Okay, let me start with the last point, whether they should step into the positions left by their nominees. Ideally, the president should look at their resume, the experience they have, and maybe rejig his cabinet. But this is a president who does not normally change positions or remove anybody. So it's better to bet that these guys will just step into the portfolios that their predecessors and their patrons are vacating, as it were. So I don't see much changing. But the ideal thing would have been to look at the resume. Some of them probably would do better in some areas based on cognitive experience, and others will change to occupy the positions that their predecessors left. The other issue is around the nature of screening. Many years ago, when David Mark was Senate President, I wrote a piece or a letter, and I argued that they should always request the president to attach a portfolio to nomination, because that's the only way really you can screen anybody meaningfully. Look at it this way. You know, the assumption that, oh, is he qualified, a graduate, he went to Harvard, or he went to Yale, or he went to Unilag, or he went to Unical, or whatever university he has worked as PAMSEC. Those are not the qualifications to be a good minister of a particular ministry. Those are basic qualifications every Nigerian can have to access any public office. So what that means that if you have a man who has been a lawyer for oil companies for years, done deals for them, and has been nominated as Minister of Petroleum, it gives opportunity to query him on how he's going to maintain conflict of interest. And in that process, you extract commitment. That's what we saw with the U.S. Congress, with the Obama appointing Clinton as Secretary of State. They had to extract commitment that the Clinton Foundation will not source funds from so and so, and when they do, they must disclose. So the essence of senatorial confirmation is to align their resume to the work they will do and the crisis in the sector and tease that from them their readiness to deal with it. So if you just say, okay, you're a minister, he has done this, or even a senator, that's no reason why a senator shouldn't go through intensive scrutiny. Because yes, being a senator is a high-profile office in Nigeria, and therefore you are qualified to hold any office. But are you appropriate, fit for purpose for a particular ministry? So they truncated the essence of senatorial confirmation. I wrote that letter to David Mark, and on air, Amadi said I have no locus for that. But the point I was trying to urge them is that try to make this process meaningful. It's not about, everybody has a resume to be a minister. Once you have certificate, you can be president. So you can be a minister. But are you fit for a particular ministry at a particular time with the issues in that ministry is something that an intense inquiry, looking at your resume, look at the pedigree, and asking you questions relating to what you've done before and what you're likely to do will help even the nominees themselves size up to that job and make commitments that you can now hold them accountable when they are performing. That's the essence of confirmation. So I would argue that ideally, whether you're a senator or House of Reps member or a former chairman of the party or local government chairman, they should spend time to ask you questions. And then they should ask their aides to supply them relevant information. That's how you prepare for the scrutiny. Then, but I don't think they have the appetite, they have the concept, the understanding, and the disposition to tread that part. So we're going to see more or less like take a bow. I mean, for example, the gender. I mean, it's important to affirm women and their right, but it shouldn't necessarily be that a particular woman should be in a particular position. So you have to scrutinize everybody.
Okay,
sure fit for that purpose.
But Mr. Amadi, being a senator in this country or a House of Rep member is not an open sesame for being able to hold any position. I mean, I'm sure you remember the case of the likes of Salisu Buhari.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, and Sam, just before you go, Efeni, earlier on in the newspaper segment, drew attention to the fact that there are 2 graduates of the University of Calabar on that list of 7. And you yourself being a Malabite, Efeni was happy that Malabites are showing up in important places. Anyway, that's just a joke. Thank you.
And there are 2 Malabites on this show. Thank you.
Right now, yes.
Malabites are everywhere.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amadi.